Okay, it's 7 minutes past the hour. Monday, February 16th. Thanks for stopping by. Give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and leave comments. We're going to read Brother Knox's article from his book called The Problem of Evil. The Problem of Evil. And this article is called The Deity of God. What a fine 4 words. The Deity of God. Welcome, Marcia and Chris, Mr. Pants. Anyway, so here's the article. If God purposed that sin should enter the world, why does he cast Satan into the lake of fire for doing what it was planned to do? It, huh? All right, hang on. Let me try it again. If God purposed, oh, by the way, give me a sound check, by the way. Yeah. Production is a thing. If God purposed that sin should enter the world, why does he cast Satan into the lake of fire for doing what it was planned that he should do? On the surface, this question seems reasonable and right. It does, doesn't it? On the surface. On the surface, this question seems reasonable and right. But beneath its demands for fairness lies the most malignant of all sins. Oh man, can you see it? I mean, listen to this. If God purposed, it sounds so fair. I mean, how many times have I had to deal with Christians or even atheists who blather on, and this sounds like logic and philosophy. One more time. If God purposed that sin should, lovely word should, huh? That sin should enter the world, why does he cast Satan into the lake of fire? For doing what it was planned that he should do. Hello, Clinton. On the surface, this question seems reasonable and right, but beneath its demands for fairness lies the most malignant of all sins. Hang on while I continue to set up my production stuff. Okay. God is put into the same category with man. Oh, yeah, there we go. God is put into the same category with man. Well, why does God punish Satan for doing exactly what Satan was created to do? So God is put into the same category with man. He is placed on trial by a jury of his peers. Oh my God. He is called to account as though he were a criminal. And we were gods, high and mighty, and far more just than he. It denies his deity. It undermines his supremacy. Man takes the empty throne and is seated with a place of power. When the great apostle of the nations was confronted with the equivalent of this question, he did not even deign to answer. Romans 9:19. None who ask it can be enlightened unless, first of all, they take the place which becomes them in his august presence. So we echo the apostles' reply. of those who seek to overthrow the truth by questioning God's right to do what he does, we simply ask, along with Paul, who are you? What a great question. Who are you? Come on, big shot, big pants. Who are you? We have no controversy with them. Their quarrel is with God until they bow to the Creator and acknowledge that they are merely creatures. His ways will be hidden, and his doings devious and dark. The question is but an echo of man's objections to God's dealings with Pharaoh. You will be protesting to me then. Why then is he still blaming for who has withstood his intention? Yep. You know what? It would be so easy to say that the atheist that the atheist would ask us this question, that the atheist would put themselves in a throne of power and judge God, right? But screw the atheists. Christians are the ones who are doing this thing. They cannot handle the wonderful doctrine of the deity of God. They're all free will all the time. And so it's the Christians who are saying, why is he still blaming for who has withstood his intention if you guys are right? But if I'm right and we have a free will, man's responsibility must be discussed because man is responsible for going to heaven or hell. The question is but an echo of man's objection to God's dealings with Pharaoh. Quote, you will be protesting to me. This is Romans 9:19. You will be protesting to me then. Why then is he still blaming for who has withstood his intention? Oh, by the way, Tommy, welcome in the side chat, and Clint and Brother Vet. Tommy, they say you sound like an owl. Just thought you'd like to know. Um, what is the Spirit's answer to such insolence? Isn't that a fine word? Insolent. Why is he still blaming? Why is God still blaming? For who has withstood his intention? Oh man, who are you to be sure who are answering again to God? That which is molded will not protest to the molder. Why did you make me thus? Or has not the potter the right over the clay out of the same kneading to do exactly what the potter wants to do, to make one vessel indeed for honor, yet one vessel for dishonor? Romans 9, verses 19 through 21. Yahweh said, I myself shall harden the heart of Pharaoh, in Exodus chapter 7, verse 3. I myself will harden the heart of Pharaoh. I myself will harden the heart of Pharaoh. Well, sir, is this a popular scripture at the Antioch Baptist Church on Sunday morning? Exodus chapter 7, verse 3. I myself shall harden the heart of Pharaoh. Elsewhere, two other Hebrew words are used. One of them is elsewhere translated encourage, establish, strengthen, fortify. Why should it have a special meaning when applied to Pharaoh? Why should it have a special meaning when applied to Pharaoh? Pharaoh's heart was weak. He was a softy. Pharaoh's heart was weak and had to be fortified after the very first infliction. Look at Exodus chapter 7, verse 22. Pharaoh had a soft, weak heart. After the second, he called for Moses and Aaron and told them he would let the people go. Exodus 8:8. After the third, it was again fortified. Exodus 8:19. After the fourth, he weakened once more and promised to let the people go into the wilderness. Exodus 8:28. While God had to encourage the king's heart, Pharaoh took the honor and glory to himself. Isn't that a interesting little nugget? So God hardened his heart, and then Pharaoh bragged that his heart was already made up. His mind was made up, and he's tough. Well, God had to encourage. Okay, let's go back up and look at this word encourage again. Okay. So, and also let's grab an underline tool and just underline the word harden. Put it up here and shrink it. There we go. For I myself shall harden the heart of Pharaoh. Elsewhere, two other Hebrew words are used. One of them is elsewhere translated encourage. I shall encourage the heart of Pharaoh. And the word establish. I shall establish the heart of Pharaoh. I shall strengthen the heart of Pharaoh. I shall fortify the heart of Pharaoh, right? God is going to make the heart of Pharaoh a tough guy. Okay, while God had to encourage the king's heart, Pharaoh took the honor and glory to himself. This is entirely obscured in our Bible translations, where three distinct terms are all rendered by the English word hardened. The third term is the same as that in the precept to honor thy father and mother. Really? Honor thy father and mother. In Exodus 20, verse 12. It never has the sense of harden. So we're talking about another word here altogether, right? Pharaoh honored or glorified his own heart. Well, isn't that something? Pharaoh honored his own heart. Honor thy father and mother. Okay, so take a look at Exodus 8:15, verse 32, back to verse 28, and chapter 9, verse 34, verse 34. God's answer to this is in the same terms. Quote, then the Egyptians will know that I am Yahweh when I am glorified over Pharaoh. When I am glorified over Pharaoh. And that would be Exodus 14, verse 18. Nothing is more mistaken than the supposition that the Pharaoh of oppression was a mighty strong heart whom nothing could move, and that his persistent opposition brought his destruction. All right, wait, let's read that again now. Nothing is more mistaken than the supposition, presupposition? Yeah, what's your I presuppose that Pharaoh hardened his own heart and that he didn't even need God to harden his own heart because he's tough, he's strong, he's got a heart that is just bent on keeping the children of Israel, right? Right. That's my presupposition. All right. Nothing is more mistaken than the supposition that the Pharaoh of the oppression was a mighty strong heart. That's a wrong supposition because he was a weak heart. He had a soft heart. He kept saying, no, go, you guys want to go, go. He said it like 9 times before he finally had no choice but to let them go. Nothing is more mistaken than the supposition that Pharaoh was a mighty strong heart, whom nothing could move, and that his persistent opposition brought his destruction. His heart was infirmed. You know what the word infirmed means, right? You go to infirmary. His heart was infirmed and faltered from the first to the finish. That's true, right? He sought one compromise after another. Wow, that's true, right? Pharaoh sought one compromise after another, but whenever he weakened, Yahweh made steadfast his heart. Yahweh hardened his heart. Yahweh made steadfast his heart so that he refused to carry out his concessions. It is useless for us to seek to evade the facts. Moses said, "Thus says Yahweh, dismiss my people that they may serve me." Exodus 10:3. And Pharaoh said that one word sentence, go. Exodus 10:8. Go, 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 go. Get the hell out of my country. Go. Yet Yahweh made the heart of Pharaoh steadfast so that he did not dismiss the sons of Israel. Exodus 10:20. The ruler of Egypt was the merest puppet in the hands of God. Oh, how lovely. Hey, boys and girls, if Pharaoh was a puppet in the hands of God, you better believe that you and I are also puppets in the hands of God. And that's a great thing. I love the thought that I am his and that I am his puppet doing exactly what he wants me to do. But why is he still blaming for who has withstood his intention? The ruler of Egypt was the merest puppet in the hands of God. Pharaoh did not think so. Pharaoh imagined that he had a free will. Pharaoh did not think so. I don't think so. I have a free will. I think not. Pharaoh did not think so. Oh, let's see. What's going on here? Finkelberger says, how does a non-belief in Jesus sentence us to eternal damnation when some people are born in Christian families and others are born in Muslim families and never see any possibility of anything else? Yep, that's a very good question. And thanks for bringing that up. And thus, my answer is that God is the Savior of all mankind, especially but not exclusively of believers. Okay, so Pharaoh didn't think that he was a puppet in the hands of God. No. He was conscious of no external coercion. Get it? He gloried in the influx of a mysterious might that enabled him to recover from his spells of fear and answered these miserable Hebrew slaves as they deserved. Herein lies the real essence of what is misnamed free will. Herein lies the real essence of what is misnamed free will. It is simply that men are not conscious of coercion. Their volition is not really the their volition is not really the independent deity it seems to be. As much as it is as much as the product of law as all else in nature. It is the composite of interior and exterior forces in which they have their being. Free will. Free will is the insensibility brought on by the anesthetic ignorance, like anesthesia, anesthetic. Oh, yeah. Ignorance will make you fall asleep to what's going on, make you unaware. Ignorance is an anesthesia. Okay, that's a clever little phrase. Never saw it before. Free will is the insensibility because you get under anesthesia and so you have insensibility. Free will is the insensibility brought on by the anesthetic ignorance. The important point for us to fix firmly is the fact that God was apparently working counter to his revealed will. Woo! Now, how are we going to fit that into our thinking? Let's go ahead and highlight it. God was apparently working counter to his revealed will. But let's see. It is but natural for us to suppose that if God said that he wanted his people to go, that he would use his influence with Pharaoh to effect their deliverance. But we forget the divine purpose behind it all. Israel's liberation and exodus and Pharaoh's defeat were not the end in view. They were merely the means to that end. The immediate purpose was the revelation of God's power. The ultimate purpose is the complete revelation of himself. All knowledge is relative. Yeah, isn't that true? All knowledge is relative. The greatness of God's power can only be grasped by contrast with another similar power. Write that one down and see if you can memorize it. Let's see what this Spinkle guy says again. I envy Christian faith, but find it so hard to believe in as much as I want to. What does this mean for me on Judgment Day? I'm not necessarily rejecting it. I simply cannot believe it. Welcome home, buddy. Okay, so all knowledge is relative. The greatness of God's power can only be grasped by contrast. The greatness of God's power can only be grasped by contrast with another similar power. Egypt's greatness and strength must be established before God's might can be manifested by its overthrow. Wow. You like great sentences? How about that one for a great sentence? The greatness of God's power can only be grasped by a contrast with another similar power. Egypt's greatness and strength must be established before God's might can be manifested by its overthrow. And if the ruler of Egypt begins to melt before his might, he must be held together long enough to stand up before the onslaughts of Yahweh. Man's puny power must actually be reinforced by God before it can even form a foil for the display of God's strength. The physical is a parable of the spiritual. Almost all locomotion or progress is the result of two counteracting forces. The major or applied power is modified by a minor or secondary force. Were the ships that cross the sea compelled to sail before the wind, they would seldom reach a haven. The helmsman holds the vessel across the path of the breeze by pitting the water against the wind. Any sailor will acknowledge that the force that holds a ship to its course is quite as necessary to its usefulness as the driving power. Gravity is the essential counterforce on land. Without gravity, we could not walk or ride. However much it may weigh on us and tire us, we could make no progress whatever without it. In walking, we lift our feet from the ground. They would continue to leave the earth, but for gravity, we could not put them down again, for we have no support for a downward thrust unless we are walking in a tunnel. But for gravity, a vehicle could ascend a hill as easily as go down a hill. Indeed, it could do neither. If it weren't for gravity, it could neither go up a hill or down a hill. It could do neither, for it would soon leave the ground and lose all power of traction. The principle of two opposing forces is contained in almost all methods of utilizing mechanical energy. Every motorist knows that to get the full effect of his fuel, the momentum of internal combustion engine must compress the charge after it has been exploded in order to produce practical results. These forces must not be equal. Equally balanced, of course, or the engine will stall. In operation, when the charge explodes, it is not immediately allowed to propel the piston, but the inertia of the engine compresses it for a brief instant, greatly increasing its potential power. After this, it is allowed to do its proper work. If anyone wishes a practical example of the principle we are discussing, let him try to crank a motor with the spark advanced to the running position. The explosion will force the engine backwards so forcefully that it will endanger the hand or arm of anyone who does not take due precaution. All right, now he must be talking about cars back when cars had crank engines back in the 1910s. So he must have wrote this early on. The electric dynamo is gradually replacing other methods of producing power, so that in civilized lands, it bids fair to become the main medium of motion and light and even heat. Suppose we could build a dynamo driven by water power. We will take scores of soft iron and wind wire around them. We will take cores. Did I say scores? I meant cores. Okay. We will take cores of soft iron and wind wire around them to make an armature. We will mount these so that the water will set them whirling. But we get no electricity. No practical effect is produced. Now, however, let us add some magnets and place the poles so that they pull the armature in the opposite direction. Now we have two opposing forces. The result is that we get an electric current. We may not be able to reason out the physical fact that an opposing power is essential, but we know that it works. The moment we withdraw the counter force, it ceases to be practical. This subtle form of energy, which can be known only from its effects, is one of the closest approximations to the divine spirit we have. The only way this physical power can be known is by the same principle which God used in the case of Pharaoh. Are you listening? I hope so. As we behold the grand orbs of space, we are appalled at all the power displayed. The moon, the sun, the myriads of stars all present such staggering exhibitions of physical force that our imagination reels and refuses to follow the facts. Yet these immense masses, as well as the most minute particles of matter in the universe, are held in place by the operations of two forces, not by one. The moon, for instance, like every other object above the earth, is constantly falling. What a tremendous impact it would make if it were not held aloft by a counteracting centrifugal motion, which seeks to make it fly off into space. These are offered simply as illustrations to enable us to grasp the grand truth taught in God's word, that he pits his power against itself and introduces conflict into creation so as to guide it into the path which leads to perfection. Had Pharaoh obeyed the revealed will of God, Yahweh's purpose would have been defeated. Oh, man. Had Pharaoh obeyed the will of God, the revealed will of God, Yahweh's purpose would have been defeated. There would have been no mighty portents, no restraining of the Red Sea, no bloodless battle, no defeat of Egypt's armies by a rabble of slaves. God's indignation and power would have remained below the horizon of human perception. Perhaps no other event has so impressed mankind with the sovereign power of Yahweh as the deliverance of his people out of Egypt. Israel never did and never will forget it. Only a few millenniums have passed since Yahweh led his people from the land of bondage, yet millions of men have marveled at the might and majesty which it manifested. The suffering involved has been justified thousands of times by the lesson which it has conveyed. With the indisputable and undeniable facts before us, we pray God's forgiveness beforehand for so much as staging the farce of bringing the divine majesty before the bar of human folly. Got it? We repeat the question with which we began, suiting it to the circumstances attending the exodus out of Egypt. If God purposed that Pharaoh should resist his mandate, why did he plague Egypt and drown Pharaoh's host in the Red Sea for doing what he had planned that they should do? Woo-wee! God himself replied that it was done to display his indignation and make his power known. Romans 9:22. Got it? God himself replies that it was done to display God's indignation and to make God's power known. And who dares to question his right to do as he wills with his own? But for those who bow before his divine majesty, there is a complete and satisfactory solution to the apparent moral obloquy, obloquy, obloquy. I haven't seen that word before. But for those who bow before his divine majesty, there is a complete and satisfactory solution of the apparent moral obloquy, which seems to cling to such arbitrary despotism. Our mistake lies in this, that we take a small segment of God's dealings with Pharaoh as a public character and treat it as though it were the complete cycle of his dealings with him as an individual. Orthodoxy, orthodoxy. You ever heard of orthodoxy? Yeah, we have to screw around with orthodoxy all the time. Orthodoxy insists that the die is cast at death. Yes, don't they ever? You have until your very last breath to repent, and then you're going to go to hell if you don't repent before your very last breath. So orthodoxy insists that the die is cast at death. According to its teachings, Pharaoh was not only coerced into rebellion against God at the Exodus, but he has consciously suffered for his sins ever since and will do so for all eternity. That's disgusting. I mean, I used to believe that crap, right? But now I can say with confidence, that's disgusting. The annihilationist view is far more, quote unquote, merciful to Pharaoh, for the annihilationist does not, for Pharaoh does not receive any punishment in death and suffers extinction of being after enduring the penalty of his acts. The revolt against God's deity has its roots in these unreasonable and irreconcilable doctrines of human destiny. Once we allow God to complete the broken record of Pharaoh's life, it's easy to justify God, and it's easy for God to justify Pharaoh. Imagine that. It is easy for God to justify Pharaoh. These are kind of big thoughts, boys and girls. I hope you're enjoying this little reading of Brother Knox's article called The Deity of God, found in his book, The Problem of Evil. And give me a thumbs up right about now. Once we allow God to complete the broken record of Pharaoh's life, it's easy to justify him, and it's easy for God to justify Pharaoh. The great king is not suffering now before he appears in the judgment to be sentenced. When he does stand before the great white throne, his sentence will be just in accord with his deeds. The judgment will be not merely penal, but corrective and remedial. Its end will be death, in which there is no suffering or consciousness of time. So far as Pharaoh's conscious experience is concerned, his death is immediately followed by his resurrection. As far as his conscious experience is concerned, his death is immediately followed by his resurrection and ushers him into the judgment at the great white throne. If he was drowned in the waters of the Red Sea, he loses all trace of time till he awakens before the great white throne. The judgment is not simply to condemn him, its object is to set right what is wrong. The greatest wrong is his attitude toward God. Oh man, that's beautiful. The greatest wrong that Pharaoh committed was his attitude toward God. In the presence of Christ and the awful throne, this will be corrected. Isn't that lovely how he uses the word awful? In the presence of Christ and the awful throne, this will be corrected by means of the blood of Christ. By means of the blood of Christ, his life will be justified. Romans 5:18. To some, it may seem inexplicable that when he is brought to this point, he should not immediately join the saints and enter into Aeonian bliss. But a little reflection will show that this has never been God's way. We are not justified and reconciled. I'm sorry, we are. We are justified and reconciled. Yet God does not immediately transport us into ineffable bliss of his presence. Man, that is beautiful. Let's highlight that one and back it up and read it again. To some knuckleheads, to some, it may seem inexplicable that when Pharaoh is brought to this point at the great white throne, he should not immediately join the saints and enter into Aeonian bliss. But a little reflection will show that this has never been God's way. We who believe, we are, name the name of the Lord and, or at least moving in that direction. We are justified and reconciled, yet God does not immediately transport us into ineffable bliss of his presence. How do most of his saints enter into glory? Through the portals of death. Some of the most faithful have actually suffered death by fire, and not by fire only, but by tortures unspeakably worse and more prolonged. We do not believe in the theology of the denial of death. We do not believe in the theological denial of death embodied in the formula, sudden death, sudden glory. Man, I haven't heard that formula. That must have been popular 100 years ago. Sudden death, sudden glory. There is no glory for us until the resurrection. That is a most comforting thought. There is no glory for us until the resurrection. The silence of the scriptures and the palpable obscurity of theologians should be sufficient to convince anyone on this point. Nevertheless, since the dead know not anything, Ecclesiastes 9:5, since the dead know not anything, this statement is true so far as where they are aware. In their conscious experience, the moment of repose coincides with the moment of awakening. Pharaoh dies the second death, yet to him it is quite as if he at once entered the unutterable glory of the consummation. Oh, that's lovely. Let me read it again. Yes, yes. Pharaoh dies a second death at the great white throne, entered into the lake of fire, which is the second death. He already died once, he will die a second time. Yet to him, it is quite as if he entered at once into the unutterable glory of the consummation. Through water, he entered into the resurrection, and through fire, he enters into vivification. That is a hell of a comment showing Brother Knox's great understanding of this, of God's Aeonian purpose. Through water, Pharaoh entered into the resurrection. He died, and then his next conscious moment will be his resurrection at the great white throne. And then through the fire of the lake of fire, he dies, and then his next conscious moment will be vivification at the consummation of the eons. Okay. Thus, Pharaoh is justified, vivified, and reconciled. He is a notable example of those whom God locks up in stubbornness, Romans 11:32. In his case, as in all others, it is done not to lead to his eternal condemnation, but that God may be merciful to him. Because Romans 11:32 says God locks up all together in stubbornness that God may be merciful to all. So, concerning Pharaoh, it's going to happen to him too. In his case, as in all others, all are locked up in stubbornness and unbelief, that God may be merciful to Pharaoh and to all. Christ, who taught his disciples to love their enemies, will display the richness of his heart and the efficacy of his blood in the reconciliation of the invisible sovereignties whom he created. Colossians 1:16 and 20. At that time, no such question will cloud the character of God, so that we can well imagine Pharaoh changing it into an affirmation rather than exaltation. He may well acclaim, "Blessed be the God who used my unworthy self to exalt his name and spread his fame. It is an honor to have been trodden beneath God's feet." What a great thought that Pharaoh will have, along with the rest of us. We'll all say that. Let's see, the case of Satan has some points particular to the arch enemy, but it is the same in principle as that of Pharaoh and all of God's opponents. The differences are in degrees, not detail. Oh, the differences are in degree and detail, not essence. If God himself encouraged Pharaoh to oppose his revealed will, we are under no necessity of seeking to invent some new God to be God's adversary. Pharaoh carried out God's larger purpose while opposing his apparent determination. So Satan is his instrument. Satan is God's instrument for producing the necessary alienation, which is the only possible basis of the universal reconciliation that we all expect, right? Satan has no more free will than Pharaoh had. Share that one with your Christian pastor. Satan has no more free will than Pharaoh had. Freedom in the creature does not consist in absolute independence of environment, but in accord with environment. God alone originates action. What? What a cool sentence that is. God alone originates action. Place, time, and circumstance control his creatures. Isn't that a wonderful thought? Are you a creature? Yes, you are. Are you controlled? Yes, you are. What controls you? Place, time, and circumstances. Place, time, and circumstances control all of God's creatures. In reality, they have as little to say about the course of their existence as they had about their creation. But consciously, within the limitations of their own experience, they are allowed the same liberty as Pharaoh had. As if that was something to brag about. They may sit upon the throne of their own diminutive personality and fondly dream that they have exalted and they have excluded God from their domain. Of such the chief is Satan, advers- ad- adversary of Christ and slanderer of God. If judgment were what men think it is, mere punishment for misbehavior, it would be somewhat difficult to see clearly just why Satan should suffer in the lake of fire for having played his part according to the underlying purpose of God. But God's judgment is never such an exhibition of puerile impotence. God's judgment sets matters right. There you have it. God's judgment sets matters right. Let's highlight that. During the eons, God's judgments will deal with all in accord with his revealed will, and in such a fashion that this will coincide with his underlying purpose at the consummation. Let me read that again. During the eons, it will deal with all in accord with his revealed will, and in such a fashion that this will coincide with his underlying purpose at the consummation. Neither is God's judgment concerned with the detached cases, with any detached cases with no reference to its effect on others, especially on God himself. He did not make his power known in dealing with Pharaoh in such a way as to forfeit the regard of all who love justice and righteousness, though it just so, God, this is a tough sentence. Okay, so, yeah, let me back it up here and see if I can turn this off. Nope, it won't turn off. Okay, neither is God's judgment concerned with detached cases with no reference to its effect on others, especially himself. He did not make his power known in his dealings with Pharaoh in such a way as to forfeit the regard of all who love justice and righteousness, though such seems to be the case at present. The judgment of Pharaoh will not only set Pharaoh right, but it will set God right in the eyes of all his creatures. Sweet. He is God. Hence, he must be an absolute ruler, but he will not yet show that his is a most but he will, yes, but he will yet show that his is a most benevolent and beneficent rule. So with Satan, his judgment is unique. Why is he not cast into the lake of fire together with the beast? Why is he not cast together into the lake of fire? Why is he not cast into the lake of fire together with the beast and the false prophet at the beginning of the 1,000 years? Because God still has work for him to do. You know, that's a very interesting question. I didn't see that. That the beast and the false prophet were cast into the lake of fire, what, 1,000 years before Satan was cast there? So it would be proper to say why. Because he still has work for Satan to do. He is not cast into the lake of fire together with the beast and the false prophet at the beginning of the 1,000 years. No, it's at the end of the 1,000 years. If it was contrary to the underlying purpose of God, that mankind should rebel at the close of the millennial reign of Christ, why is he kept and loosed in order to bring it about? Let me read that one again. If it was contrary to the underlying purpose of God that mankind should rebel, so obviously it's not contrary. It's perfect that Satan should be loosed at the end of the 1,000 years and gin up everyone to rebel against God again. That's perfect. That's God's perfect time and perfect way and perfect plan. If it was contrary to the underlying purpose of God that mankind should rebel at the close of the millennium, why is Satan kept and loosed in order to bring it about? Some will insist that this rebellion is of the devil, and so it was. But if the mayor of one of our principalities were to set a noted political prisoner loose in order to lead a revolution against the government, there are some hard-headed individuals who would hold him responsible just as much, if not more, than the traitor. Satan's judgment is not a private, but a public affair. Well, Satan's judgment is not a private, but a public affair, quite as much as his previous career. He is not bound for his own sake, but to restrain his power for evil. He does not make his escape, but is deliberately loosed in order to stir up strife. It is evident that Gog and Magog would not have rebelled apart from Satan's instigation. They are not, quote unquote, responsible. Neither could Satan have done it if he had not been set free. He is not responsible. Satan is not responsible. No, that's right. Because in the grand scheme of things, boys and girls, only God is responsible. And if God is not responsible for all of his creation, then God is rather irresponsible. So Satan is not responsible. God alone is responsible, for he is the only one who is neither bound nor influenced by an exterior force. Ha ha! I'm having fun now. Yes, sir. All those Christian preachers out there, those big super Christians who think that man is responsible for his own eternal destiny, you know the truth. God alone is responsible, for he is the only one who is neither bound nor influenced by an exterior force. Wow. Here is an episode in the annals of evil which we would commend to the consideration of those who insist on the deity of Satan, but repute the deity of God. Wow. You know, there are a lot of Christian boys out there that give more super duper power to Satan than they do to God. They definitely preach that God is kind of like out of control, but Satan is not out of control. He's doing exactly what he wants. Yeah, because, you know, we pointed out on this channel a number of times that Christianity is just kind of like an illegitimate stepchild of Zoroastrianism. They believe that there are two gods, one good God and one evil God, and they're battling it out. And the good God's going to win a few, but not very many. And the evil God's going to win the biggest majority in the history of eternity. Here is an episode in the annals of evil which we would commend to the consideration of those who insist on the deity of Satan, but repudiate the deity of God. Brother Knock was pretty cool with his words. They may refuse Yahweh's solemn declaration that he is the creator of evil and place the sable crown on the brow of Satan and thus rob God of his proper place because their vision of the past has been dimmed by the fogs of tradition. But they cannot confute the fact that in this final eruption of sin, which rehearses briefly in its introduction at the first, their God goes forth as the obedient vassal of his jailer. And he's got the word jailer capitalized here, which is a reference to God, right? Woo! Okay. The unbinding of Satan is just as much the deliberate act of God as his binding in the beginning of the 1,000 years. Man, what a lovely sentence. The unbinding of Satan is just as much the deliberate act of God as his binding at the beginning of the 1,000 years. So why is Satan let loose out of his bottomless pit thingy at the end of the 1,000 years? It's because God has use of him. Satan doesn't know what the hell he's being used for. It is worthy of note that Satan is one of the few who receive no hearing before the great white throne. It is worthy of note that Satan is one of the few who receive no hearing before the great white throne. As soon as his part is played, he enters the lake of fire. There is no need to inquire into his case. All judicial proceedings are superfluous. With ordinary human beings, the lake of fire means immediate death, but not so with Satan. A man would soon succumb to imprisonment in the abyss. Satan stood it for 1,000 years. There was no reason to suppose that it was a place of suffering We have no ground for believing that Satan suffers before his doom. The salutary, though severe, providence, which subdues and softens the hearts of mankind, has never been his portion. Some of God's dearest saints have spent a lifetime in pain, and they will thank him for it when they realize its benefits. It does not destroy their sense of God's love. It will form the foil for its display. For Satan to enter the consummation with all the unbroken pride and arrogance that are his at the end of the 1,000 years would be unthinkable. Then all creation will have been subdued, hence Satan must be the subject of the severest discipline to bring him into subjection to God and in harmony with all creation at the consummation. This is found in the lake of fire. This is not the place where men are judged. Their judgment precedes the lake of fire. Satan suffers in the lake of fire. There is just as equitable a proportion between his life and its reflection as there is in the case of mankind. If men are judged in accord with their deeds, it is only reasonable to assume that Satan's doom should be more severe to accord with his doings. In brief, the case of Satan presents no special difficulty. The case of Pharaoh or any other man presents precisely the same problem. Indeed, our own experience ought to enable us. Hang on, I gotta take a sip of coffee here and clear my throat. All right. In brief, the case of Satan presents no special difficulties. The case of Pharaoh or any man or of any man presents precisely the same problem. Indeed, our own experience ought to enable us to understand these great examples. We may refuse to believe that Satan was made a sinner apart from his own choosing, but we can hardly convince even ourselves that we had any choice in our own entrance into the world as we are. Why not ask, if men come into a world of sin without their own volition, what right has God to condemn them? The principle is the same. The answer is the same. God is God, and we are his creatures. Sweet. We see the answer to this problem in the creation about us. Romans 8, verses 18 to 24. God has subjected all creation to vanity. It had no will in the matter, but this is in expectation. This is in expectation. We can see the solution in our own experience. We are suffering at the present time, not because God uses us to oppose his will, but because we are making it known. Man, that's a complicated thought. We can see the solution in our own experience. We are suffering at the present time, not because God uses us to oppose his will, but because we are making it known. Is it not stranger to suffer for doing the will of God? Is it not stranger to suffer for doing the will of God than for consciously undoing his decrees? Yeah, a lot of Paul's letters indicate that we will suffer even though we're on this path. You come into the faith, you'll suffer. Is it not more difficult to see why we should suffer than to understand Satan's judgment? Let me get that right. Hang on. Is it not more difficult to see why we should suffer than to understand Satan's judgment? But, you say, we have a hope. We know that our suffering does not deserve the glory about to be revealed. So with all suffering, it is transcendent, disciplinary, corrective, and leads to the haven of God's heart. Christ died for all, and all will eventually benefit from the efficacy of his blood. If Satan, created to oppose God, were doomed to eternal torment, then we may indeed question the justice of God. If the adversary, formed to destroy, is finally annihilated, then indeed we may wonder if God has done right. So long as we are held together, no, so long as we are held by either of these alternatives, we are almost forced to shield the character of God by falling back on the assumption that God is not responsible for the creation of his adversary. Oh, yeah. And thus we unconsciously drag God from his throne. The doctrine of the deity of the devil is the rational recoil from God's supposed inability to bring his creation to a successful consummation. But once we see that sin and suffering are parts of the divine goal, not the goal, they're just parts of the divine process, not the goal, that all will contribute to the full revelation of God, the revelation of himself, and the utmost blessing of his creatures, we have a destiny which does not demand God's dethronement at the beginning. We do not need to fabricate another God to take the blame from God's shoulders. In brief, we have a God. Satan's suffering in the lake of fire is essential to God's purpose for both God and all creation. It is not his end, it is not Satan's end. It is the process by which he is prepared for his ultimate place in the perfect universe. The rational retribution of believing in the triumph. The rational retribution of believing in the triumph of Satan at the close is to deify him at the beginning. Man, let's read that again. The rational retribution of believing in the triumph of Satan at the close is to deify him at the beginning. Reason demands that one who can thwart God and rob God of the mass of his creatures must be his equal or superior. As a result, we come to the most startling conclusion that very few, even of his saints, intelligently hold to the proper deity of God. Of course, all will repudiate the charge. They would not think of denying what seems so fundamental, yet their words and their actions all proclaim that God is not God alone. but only one of the Christian pantheon. It is only as we see God's supreme success at the consummation that he will be all in all of his creatures that we are able to grasp the great truth of the deity of God. Only then can we turn back to the beginning and see him supreme. Only then can we look above the clouds and see him ride the storm. Only then can we believe him when he says in Isaiah 45, verses 6 to 9, I am Yahweh, and there is no other, former of light and creator of darkness, maker of good and creator of evil. I, Yahweh, make all these things. Drip down from above heavens and let the skies distill righteousness. Let the earth open up. Let salvation bud. And let righteousness sprout together with it. I, Yahweh, create it. Would anyone contend with his former? Earthenware of the ground with its artificer? Ah, there you go. That's the end. Let me put the StreamYard link in so you can hop in if you want. And we might talk sense. We might not. Man, that was a powerful essay. The Deity of God. It's not a popular subject. In fact, I have asked quite a few Christians if they believe in the deity of God. What do you mean? Kind of like Jill. What do you mean? What do you mean by the word deity? What do you mean by the word God? So the deity of God is a little darling phrase that means the godness of God. Because when you are acting like a Zoroastrian nut job, you're going to say that there are many gods out there, and Satan is, God didn't create Satan. Satan created himself. He had free will and he created himself, and therefore he's going to win more souls than God does. They're battling it out, though. Yeah, that's for sure. Let me back up to the beginning here, and we'll just read our highlighted passages. And if no one comes in, then we'll close up shop and prepare for a sweet, dreamless sleep. Where are we? 93. I think it starts at 194. There it is. The Deity of God. How'd you like the reading of it, boys and girls? Is it worthy of a thumbs up? Come on. Okay. Here's what we got highlighted. If God purposed that sin should enter the world, why does he cast Satan into the lake of fire for doing what it was planned he should do? And then this doesn't make sense. On the surface, this question seems reasonable and right, but beneath its demands for fairness lies the most malignant of all sins. So let's make sure we highlight the whole thing. Okay, forward. Why is he still blaming? For who has withstood his intention? And then from Exodus, it says, I myself will harden the heart of Pharaoh. I myself shall harden the heart of Pharaoh. And then it turns out that the words encourage, establish, strengthen, and fortify might have something to do with the Hebrew word that is translated harden. Encourage, establish, strengthen, fortify. And then let's see. The ruler of Egypt was the merest puppet in the hands of God. Pharaoh did not think so. And in this, God was apparently working counter to his revealed will. Isn't that special? The immediate purpose was the revelation of God's power. Let's see. Had Pharaoh obeyed the revealed will of God, Yahweh's purpose would have been defeated. If God purposed that Pharaoh should resist his mandate, why did he plague Egypt and drown Pharaoh's host in the Red Sea for doing what he had planned that they should do? And we've got this. Orthodoxy teaches that the die is cast at death. Ha ha! According to Orthodoxy teaching, Pharaoh was not only coerced into rebellion against God at the Exodus, but he has consciously suffered for his sins ever since and will do so for all eternity. That's what Orthodoxy kind of says. It was easy for God to justify Pharaoh. The greatest wrong was Pharaoh's attitude toward God. We are justified and reconciled, yet God does not immediately transport us into ineffable bliss of his presence. Cool your heels, baby, each in his own order. There is no glory for us until the resurrection. Through water, Pharaoh entered into the resurrection, and through fire, Pharaoh will enter into vivification. Sweet. God alone originates action. Sweet. Judgment sets matters right. God alone is responsible. For God alone is the only one who is neither bound nor influenced by exterior force. Let's see. Why did I think the word jailer was cool here? Let me back up and figure it out. Here is an episode of the Annals of Evil, which we would recommend to the consideration of those who insist on the deity of Satan, but repudiate the deity of God. Let's go ahead and highlight that because that sounds really worthy of it. Okay. They may refuse Yahweh. They may refuse Yahweh's solemn declaration that God is the creator of evil and place the sable crown on the brow of Satan and thus rob God of his power, his proper place, because of their vision of the past has been dimmed by the fogs of tradition. But they cannot refute the fact that in this final eruption of sin, which rehearses briefly its introduction at the first. Their God, Satan, goes forth as the obedient vassal of his jailer. The unbinding of Satan is just as much the deliberate act of God as his binding at the beginning of the 1,000 years. Wow. If men come into a world of sin without their own volition, what right has God to condemn them? The principle is the same. The answer is the same. God is God. We are his creatures. The end. Thank you, boys and girls, for hanging out with me while we go over this little chapter. Give me a thumbs up and share this episode with somebody. And you can pass it on to them and say it is idiot free because none of our opposers came in to argue. How could they argue with this? What are they going to do? Write their own essay that say, no, don't believe in the deity of God. We must re-emphasize the deity of Satan. Yep, that's what Christians kind of do. Good night and grace to you. Bye for now.